All right, guys. Well, welcome. I am so thrilled and honored to be with Isabel Brown. You are the author of The End of the Alphabet, How Gen Z Can Save America, host also of the Isabel Brown Show. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. This is my third or fourth time on Liberty's campus, and every time it gets better, I swear.
Okay, now I got to know about this. You've been here before. So what are the other occasions you have come?
A few different campus speaking engagements. I was trying to recall a minute ago the last time I was here. I believe I was with the legendary Kristen Hawkins for a Students for Life event. And I was recalling that we were so excited to come to Liberty because the few events we had before that were so tumultuous and angry and confrontational on her last speaking tour. And coming to Liberty was a breath of fresh air with these inquisitive, curious, truth-seeking students. And it really does just feel different. The entire atmosphere does.
I will say this, coming to Liberty, a lot of people will comment, it's like coming home.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's a huge welcome. These are your supporters. These are people who champion the cause of life, champion the cause of truth, champion the cause of freedom. You are such a critical voice to the Gen Z generation. I appreciate so much the work that you're doing to reach out to the next generation. I want to talk a little bit about your book. So, The End of the Alphabet, How Gen Z Can Save America. Very, very important. Why would you, I think it's one of those things that when we look at the next generation, there's a lot that people are discouraged by what they see. I want to talk a little bit about that from your perspective, but then also, where is their hope? Some say, hey, there's no hope for the future. I don't think that's true. I don't think you think that's true. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, I'll tell you what, releasing that book in March of this year turned a whole lot of heads and raised a lot of eyebrows, particularly in mainstream media and establishment politics. When they hear how Gen Z can save America, a lot of people stop dead in their tracks thinking, but all I've ever heard about this generation is how they're destroying America. I knew from the last few years of working on college campuses and with high school students, and particularly engaging with tens of millions of Gen Zers online every day, that just wasn't reality. And yet that was the story being told for us by those older than us to somehow try to place blame on the shoulders of our generation for how badly culture has gone off the rails in the West, not even just the United States. So I set out to prove that wrong in writing this book and encourage the next generation to embrace leadership for such a time as this, and was floored by what I found. We already knew statistically that young men were trending pretty conservative politically over the last few years. But on a cultural basis, if we zoom out from R&D, red and blue politics, Gen Z as a whole is culturally the most conservative generation America has seen since World War II. What do I mean by that? Politics, obviously, and that's very clearly being manifested with young men campaigning this election cycle and bringing so much excitement to college campuses. But on the cultural side, despite being told that marriage and family are somehow detrimental to your future, 93% of current college students say that they still want to get married in a totally anti-marriage culture. 62% of Gen Zers, even those who are still teenagers, have already started their own businesses, realizing that they don't need to spend $250,000 on a degree in underwater lesbian basket weaving, which I know is not offered here at Liberty, but sadly is offered at most universities. We want free speech. We're anti-cancel culture. We're eating real food and skeptical of what's happening in the big food and big pharma industries. We're moving out of big cities and towards smaller communities. And maybe most excitingly, Gen Z is seeing a huge resurgence in faith in God. In fact, at the end of 2021, less than 1/3 of all Gen Zers said that they remotely believed in a higher power. But by the end of last year, 2023, more than 1/3 of us do. And you're watching this huge upswing of more than 10 percentage points in just 2 years, with young people proudly proclaiming we believe in God. We're seeing these mass baptisms on college campuses, worship nights, and it's taking off like fire.
Yeah, I fully agree. Like what we're witnessing is kind of it's almost like a retro kind of thing where I'm reminded of my great-grandparents and grandparents' generation. They believed in the institution of marriage, held it sacred. You kind of went through the the boomer generation where it was multiple divorces,
Yep.
right? You had the X generation that was deeply cynical, and then millennials, and then now Gen Z. There's kind of a swinging back. The pendulum's kind of going back the other way. And there was a time where secularism was at its peak, and it said, "Hey, this liberal consensus is great, except for it's horrible, right? Because of what it's brought about." People are now turning back towards faith. So I fully agree that things do swing back. Some recent studies have shown that young men are trending more conservative, as you say, but it seems the opposite for the Gen Z women. In your experience, is that true? What are you seeing there? Why is that happening?
That is the story that's often told and certainly is backed up by all of the political polling, which is totally accurate always, especially this close to a presidential election. I'm skeptical of polls, and I'm really skeptical of some of these statistics because it doesn't tell the whole picture of culture beyond American politics when we talk about trending conservative and trending more liberal. I mean, the fact that 93% of all Gen Zers still want to get married, particularly when women are constantly told marriage is a patriarchal institution, it's demeaning to you, it's going to limit your opportunities in life, and simultaneously are being told by outlets like the Los Angeles Times that it's shameful to want to have children, a recent headline from the last few weeks. That's not the attitudes that we're seeing young women embrace. For example, I talk a whole lot about women's issues on social media from a cultural lens, not so much a political one. And we're watching a massive anti-birth control revolution unfold before our eyes because young girls who were prescribed birth control for acne or pain or heavy periods, like every 15-year-old in this generation, I was one about a decade ago, are realizing I don't like who I am when I'm taking basically slow release poison for 10 years of my life. And maybe there's more to the story here. Women are realizing that they don't need to end the life of their preborn child in order to be successful in their career or feel fulfilled later on in their life. In fact, they're capable of so much more than that. And marriage and motherhood and their careers aren't mutually exclusive. So I think what you're really seeing right now is a different later attack on women that's manifesting beyond the attack on men and masculinity that we've seen for the last several decades. That was a pretty simple one. Men equal bad, eat all men, toxic masculinity needs to be rid from society, period. But what we're watching with the attack on womanhood seems far deeper and more sinister to me, with a much more calculated end goal, and that's to erase womanhood entirely. Just as we saw masculinity be removed from society, and then the emergence of strong masculine voices like Charlie Kirk or Brandon Tatum or Jordan Peterson reminding men it's okay to be men, you're now seeing women step up to the plate and defend womanhood, even from very unexpected places. Look at people like J.K. Rowling, for example,
Right.
courageously saying women still deserve to exist. And what I'm really interested in is to watch that circular pattern continue to unfold for women now, because as we know, strong times create hard men, or hard men are created by these difficult times. And we're watching that cycle also unfold for women right now. I think it's just happening a little bit later, and it's taking a bit longer because that attack is so much more strategic.
Yeah, I fully agree with you. I want to go back to something you were saying earlier, because this is about, the youngest generation just arriving, essentially the older generation placing all the guilt and the blame on the youngest, right? Being a millennial, we weren't the ones who gave out trophies, for participation.
True.
That was our parents.
Although
right?
you get all the blame
Yeah,
for it.
you get the blame for it. The gig economy was certainly that during the Obama era, it was all about the gig economy. And so millennials were known as being those that just go back and retreat into their parents' basement. That was not my experience, but I did experience all throughout my 20s, basically working 2 and 3 jobs. I had a full-time job plus additional jobs because we got married, at the age of 23. We wanted to start a family. We were doing all kinds of things. We didn't want to go into debt. Some of the worst advice that I got from baby boomers. It doesn't matter what it is. Invest in yourself by getting a college degree, and make sure, to totally focus on your studies. And it's okay to go into debt because you're investing in yourself. And I was like, well, that might have worked in 1978. 5 job offers right out of high school, 15 right out of college, but that's not how it works today. Anyway, there's a whole soapbox there as well, but it's hopeful to see the Gen Z generation embracing things that actually were not valued by previous generations. Gen Z women, they are likely to support abortion, leading to the issue rising to the top among political issues among Americans. We're seeing this right now in the Harris Walls campaign. Very big. In fact, there's a lot of scaremongering
Yeah.
on this issue. And I'll just say this, from my standpoint, I'm an abolitionist. So both candidates are unsatisfactory to me on the issue of life. One is definitely better than the other on the issue of life. So it's not equivocal that both are the same. That's not true. But talk a little bit about the life issue regarding abortion. Is it basically is it one of those things where it's freedom for me but not for thee? What is it that people are saying about that with the youngest generation?
Interestingly, this has become the number one issue for the Kamala Harris campaign in particular. And she has said many times on the campaign trail herself that it is the only issue that women should remotely be thinking about when it comes to casting their vote, which frankly, I find wildly insulting and encouraging women to vote solely with their uterus rather than their brain or their heart and soul for what's going on with the problems in our country, but also is failing to understand where American culture sits currently on the issue of abortion entirely. How many times during this campaign have we heard Kamala Harris say she supports an any reason, at any time, or no reason whatsoever, all-access abortion campaign through all 9 months of pregnancy? She's refusing to acknowledge that in 9 states plus the District of Columbia, that is in fact legal in the United States today to even have a partial birth abortion. And in her running mate's home state in Minnesota, we know there have been at least 8 children under Tim Walz's gubernatorial staff being in office over the last few years that have been born alive from a failed abortion and left to die on the table. These are documented realities, and there is a very clear campaign to convince you those things are really bad, and we know they're really bad, and you feel kind of uncomfortable by them, but they're not really happening because this is the only issue that women are allowed to care about. I find that incredibly insulting and a slap in the face to the intelligence of women, but also to the empathy that our country is truly experiencing to this issue. Our technology only continues to improve. Our understanding of what an abortion truly is only continues to improve. And if you're fortunate to be pregnant today, you can go in for an ultrasound at 6 weeks and hear your baby's heartbeat, see your baby moving around on the screen. We know brainwave activity starts at 6 weeks old. I mean, this is a very clear-cut, different culture than it was when we were talking about abortion at the time of Roe v. Wade being instituted in 1973. As a result of that, 9 in 10 voters under the age of 45 support at least some restrictions on abortion, are deeply uncomfortable with the idea of an all-access abortion campaign being put forth by Kamala Harris under the umbrella guise of women's rights or reproductive health care or whatever label we want to call it. So there's a clear disconnect between where the average American is, man or woman, particularly young voter, and what the Democrat Party is trying to convince Americans, young women, are trying to believe. And I really think that comes down to our knowledge getting better, our empathy for others getting better, our medicine and technology getting better. But not many people are willing to fill the gap for that conversation because for whatever reason, historically, I think the Republican Party has been very shy on this issue. And the approach to this on the presidential campaign trail in particular has been, don't bring it up. It's too controversial. We never want to answer questions about this. This is the single biggest moral and ethical issue, human rights issue of our time. And I often am quoted on college campuses that later goes viral in the media that this is truly the biggest genocide the human race has ever seen. We're talking about 63 million people who are innocent people being murdered, slaughtered, dismembered in the womb in the most grotesque of ways, which is difficult to talk about, but so important for us to talk about so that we know, solely for their location, their size, their inconvenience to another human being. I recently read, for Gen Z in particular, that 1/3 of our generation is not here. solely because of abortion.
Yeah.
1 in 3 of us. Those are future husbands and wives, future professors, inventors, doctors, maybe the next president of the United States or inventor like an Elon Musk. And we've convinced ourselves that it is so good for humanity that this must continue to exist. I think what American voters are really looking for now that we know better is simply moral clarity on the issue and a courage and a boldness to tell the truth, even when it's really difficult to hear.
Yeah. Oh man, so well said. And you think about 1 in 3 too. When you think about 63 million people over the course of 50 some odd years, that's like 10 trillion or 15 trillion missing from the economy. And so even from even if you were a utilitarian who had
Totally.
no moral value whatsoever, you could say dollars and cents, every life actually has immense economic value even. And so it's ironic to me, though, that those who support a nanny state, administrative state, who would want to tax the life out of everything, don't actually want bodies to tax, which is just it's insane. But here's the other thing, and Isabel, you hit the nail on the head too, in terms of just the insult to young women. The price being paid for inconvenience is the death of an unborn child. They are paying that price, not the adults. Today, I see in the classroom, in state schools, children are paying the price.
Yeah.
Not even their parents. I hate to say this, and it's not an indictment against parents, but we do need to wake up that some parents think it's inconvenient to homeschool or think it's inconvenient to take their kids out of government-run schools. They continue to subject their children to this indoctrination without actually addressing the issue. So we blame teachers, we blame teachers' unions, but parents are the ones who have to stand up and do something about it. That's why I think it's so important that we speak up and we draw these lines in the sand. For a while, it seems as though many people have been afraid to talk about gender ideology. Now we're kind of seeing that, the pendulum swing the other way. Riley Gaines, great example. She was a University of Kentucky swimmer. I think her story has definitely resonated with a lot of people. What needs to happen in order to really turn the tide? I mean, I think that you are seeing a little bit of resistance here and there, but there's still a great deal of gaslighting. The Olympics is a perfect example of this. It seems as though it's the institutions are being controlled by those who've bought into this gender ideology, and they're still running shop.
Yeah, they sure are, at least in the United States of America. I see immense hope from other countries in the West starting to put their foot down and say, enough, we're not doing this anymore. The UK comes to mind, for example, where in the last year, they have said no more gender ideology in public schools across the United Kingdom. We won't be doing any child gender transition in NHS clinics, which are the taxpayer-funded medical clinics there. Sweden and Finland have done very similar big pendulum swings back in the other direction, despite most of those countries being some of the first to institute child gender transition in this conversation to begin with. But here there is a whole lot more resistance, and I do think the institutions are being run by those who clearly have an agenda to push. I'll give you a more recent example even. Yesterday, there was a headline in the New York Times that over the last year or so, the U.S. government has been funding a $10 million study on puberty blockers for children with the attempt to prove that giving children puberty blockers is better for their health in the long run. Turns out the study, in fact, proved the opposite to be true, that mental and physical health outcomes became detrimental to children who had received puberty blockers. And now the doctors who conducted the study don't want to release the findings publicly because of politics. And they're worried that in America we'll see very similar bans to what most of Western Europe is talking about right now. If that doesn't shake you to your very, very core with what the real agenda behind this mission is, I don't know what else could. But I think it goes back to that more sinister plot of the attack on womanhood I was talking about earlier, because this is an attack on reality and truth and fundamental humanity to its very core. Yes, you see men playing women's sports and taking trophies and academic scholarships and athletic opportunities away from women, which is a huge problem that I'm glad is being addressed. Yes, we see men joining women's sororities and crazy lawsuits coming from places like the University of Wyoming, of all college campuses, where girls in their sorority house are being subjected to actual sexual harassment from their sister in their sorority and no support from the national organization, which is terrible. We watch women be subject to this stuff in the Miss Universe pageant and Women of the Year awards, and we could keep going with example by example. But I think what most people don't know is that we're actually watching a fundamental rewriting of humanity and basic science and biology in the process of this gender ideology that often goes swept under the rug by the media. What does that look like? I was pre-med way back when, so I love talking science and medicine, but I can't tell you how many people I've heard testimony from who have been referred to as birthing people in the hospital instead of mothers when they deliver their children. I can't tell you how many stories I've uncovered of breastfeeding suddenly turning into chest feeding in the United States, which not only is a nice word to accommodate for women who think they are men and don't want to associate with the word breast, but we are actually spending research money in the United States today to stimulate artificial lactation in biological men using hormone injections and a whole cocktail of pharmaceuticals so that a man can breastfeed their child juice. That's essentially what it is, a hormone cocktail rather than actual breast milk that's going to sustain the life of your child. You're watching women and men alike be completely taken out of the procreative process of humanity entirely, with startup companies in San Francisco, like a company called Conception, super freaky name, where they are growing human embryos in petri dishes in laboratories entirely from stem cells. No egg cells or sperm cells involved in the process at all. So this very odd, Brave New World, Gattaca dystopian reality that feels like something out of 1984 is truly happening under the surface of a lot of the outrage we see in the newspapers, on television, on social media. And those things matter, and those fights really matter. But I worry often that we're so focused on the latest viral TikTok influencer, a la Dylan Mulvaney, that we're forgetting about the fact that we are literally erasing manhood and womanhood with this gender ideology in the process. And you want to talk about it with kids and taking responsibility there. Talk about the abortion industry. Planned Parenthood is the largest single drafter of sexual education and gender identity curriculum in all public schools in the United States. And in a post-Roe America, where they're desperately looking on how to make money because they can't necessarily make money from abortion procedures in many of these states, they have become the #1 provider of puberty blockers and hormone treatment for teenagers. On their own website, they say you can walk into our clinic and walk out the same day with a brown paper bag, testosterone in hand, no doctor's note, no history of gender dysphoria, no accompaniment by a parent. It is a very scary reality.
So you're looking for a university that's perfect for you, a school that has anything you could possibly need.
Anything?
You want a place that has the programs you want to study, and maybe a few more, just in case you change your mind.
I think I'm going to sign up for the fashion design program.
All right. A place with state-of-the-art facilities. I mean, look at this campus.
And who doesn't love big time sports?
And great recreational activities.
Okay, now we're on a roll. Somewhere you can hike, slide, strike, shoot, climb, eat, and most importantly, eat. You want a place that takes you to space! Okay, maybe not, but we can teach you how to fly, or pastor a church, or run a business. And all that with a great view? Yeah, I think I know a place.
Yeah, it's horrific. You think about what we've been told for decades is that science is perfect. Follow the science. You hear this all the time. We heard this during COVID. And there's this expression, scientism, which it's like science is God itself. Or God himself. The scientific method was invented by Christians. There is a process. We understand that there is a creator. There is a creative order to the universe. The well-ordered universe is because there is a designer whose name is God. And those, though, that push this or pushing it in the name of ideology. Dr. James Lindsay, this a couple of years ago, but this was during COVID, he was talking about medical Lysenkoism. And Lysenko was this doctor in the Soviet Union that Stalin had put in charge of solving for famine. Basically, people were starving in the Soviet Union. It was Lysenko that was supposed to help, create more food for those in the Soviet Union. And it turned out, lo and behold, he's applying his own communist ideology to what he was doing. So he wasn't doing anything scientifically. Instead, it was all driven by ideology, and it led to millions and millions of people in mass starvation dying. And we see Lysenkoism, expressions of that, in the gender ideology confusion, in reproductive health, and all of these other things. Whatever they are, it's ideology driving it, not the science itself.
Absolutely correct. And ultimately, I think this is why there is such a hunger and a drive and a need to bring God back into our culture, and why young people are so fascinated by belief in something bigger than what's right in front of us. Because you're right, we're told to blindly trust Anthony Fauci as the science. We're told to blindly trust mainstream legacy media institutions, or to believe everything we see from Hollywood, or to believe that our college professor is always telling us the truth, which at Liberty, I'm sure they are, but most universities, they're not. And so we've watched this skepticism continue to bubble to the surface over the last few years, because none of those things prove to be a solid foundation to stand upon. Ultimately, everything begins to crumble. There's a long joke from the last few years that every conspiracy theory is just the truth 6 months early, right? And you end up going viral for that 6 months down the line. The Babylon Bee has predicted so many crazy things happening over the last few years. But when all of those things fall apart, I think it's left our generation feeling like we have nothing left to stand on, that we're on this quicksand foundation of a society, and we want a bedrock of something that we can fall back on, that is always true, that is timeless and traditional. And I love that about the cultural trajectory we're seeing, because even within Christianity, we aren't looking for this half-in, half-out cultural rainbow-washed, sparkle creed, feel-good Christianity. Gen Z in the Catholic Church is the most likely generation to seek out the Latin Mass. You're watching mass baptism events take place, not just silly worship nights that often don't amount to a huge conversion of someone's inner soul. On many of these SEC college campuses here in the South this semester, the Ohio State University football team has a huge lineup of football players doing the rounds on podcasts right now, reading the gospel and breaking down scripture in a very, very powerful way. So there's a meat and a substance there to our faith that I think a lot of older people didn't ever see coming.
Yeah, amen that. I wholeheartedly agree. On that note, Harrison Butker, he went viral for a speech that he gave at a Catholic university, but he was defending marriage. Its sacredness is an institution that was given by God, but then also just the value of being a man, the value of being a husband and being a father, the value of being a woman, the value of being a wife and a mother. All of a sudden, there were all kinds of people coming out that were just spewing venom and hatred, and absolutely wanted to reject that, and calling him a toxic, a masculine male, right? That this is a form of abuse. What are your thoughts on that?
I will never forget the week that all of that went viral. We reacted on my live stream to the whole speech, which, frankly, before it even went viral for being so controversial, I said on my show, this might be the best commencement speech I've ever heard. It addressed everything it needed to about looking back on your time in college and the foundation you received there, what you can accomplish as an adult, going after your career, your family, how to serve your community. It hit all of the nails right on the head. And about 2 days later, my entire TikTok feed was flooded with women professionals, NFL cheerleaders, feminist icons, you name it, just about everyone, saying what a horrible human being this was and how little he valued women. And I had to pause at that moment and say, hang on, I don't think we watched the same speech, because that is not at all the takeaway that I had, particularly when he addressed women in that very small little segment that got clipped up. So I went back and I watched it again. And if you didn't ever get the chance to watch Harrison Butker's entire speech, I encourage you to go find it on social media, because it is very powerful. First, he addresses men specifically about their need to embrace true masculinity, not a toxic version of it, but leadership and character and moral fiber in a culture that is desperately looking for those things, before moving on to talk to women directly, in which he starts by saying, I'm sure many of you will go on to have very fulfilling careers, and that it's an amazing thing that you've worked very, very, very hard to achieve. Also, not mutually exclusive, you should consider the value of marriage and motherhood, because there is a joy and a purpose and a fulfillment there that I've been told by my wife and by every other woman in my life is completely unmatched in any other area of life, particularly from one's career. Somehow that got twisted into get back into the kitchen and make me a sandwich, all of you barefoot women who need to be pregnant all the time, which is such a bizarre twisting of words. Even more recently, there was an op-ed bringing this back up to the surface in The Guardian, in which the author called Harrison Butker Taliban adjacent for saying those words. How we can go in a society to Taliban adjacent for, hey, it's actually a really beautiful thing to get married and have kids, but also fail to criticize the actual Taliban when they lock women in their homes and say, you're not allowed to speak out loud anymore because a woman's voice should not be legal in our society. I don't know. That's just modern feminism, I suppose. But I think it really speaks to the heart of the issue of just how much sacred relationships and the sacred institution of the family is under attack by those pulling the levers of power in every aspect of culture today. There is a reason that they are advocating for the end to the nuclear family. There is a reason that they tell you you are too dumb to homeschool your kids. You're going to mess it up somehow and we have to do it. There is a reason that they are taking custody from parents of children who are gender transitioning at school, and parents are trying to safeguard their kids from all of this stuff and protect their innocence. It's because those in positions of power, particularly in the radical establishment left, are discovering that the family is the last unit they need to permeate to take total control of society. And luckily, I think we're seeing a whole lot of cultural pushback to that. You're watching this desire to get married. You're watching people want to have children again, which we desperately need to do, by the way, because we literally can't replace our own population. But you're watching the Make More Babies movement started by companies like Every Life and Elon Musk highlighting stuff like this. I think in response to this anti-family agenda that has slowly been permeating every part of culture in America for the past several decades, I think just now is starting to be made obvious.
Absolutely. Gen Z is known for experiencing higher than normal levels of depression, anxiety. Why do you think this is?
It is not an exaggeration to say that young people today are experiencing the single greatest mental health crisis the world has ever known. That's been true of anxiety and depression. It's also been true of record high suicide attempts and rates over the past several years. And interestingly, for the first time ever in the last few years, young women have been attempting suicide more than young men. That is a brand new trajectory and trend, and I think probably has a whole lot to do with the gender ideology movement, but we don't like to study those things in America. But truly, in 2021, 1 in 3 teenage girls seriously contemplated taking her own life.
Yeah.
Which I think most people aren't aware of or don't realize is so common, but 33% of our society of teenage girls actually thought it would be a better alternative to not be here at all than to endure the society that we've built and we call the most progressive and most utopian and most perfect futuristic society the world has ever known. Ultimately, I think it's really simple. We've removed purpose and meaning and fulfillment from people's lives for convenience sake. I mean, you can have anything delivered to your door in about an hour from Amazon Prime. You don't really need to go into an office and have a sense of community for work anymore. In the era of COVID, everything was pushed online educationally. And for people like my youngest sister, we did a drive-through graduation on her high school campus before going off to college. No prom, no real graduation, no sense of those milestone achievements that young people are so excited to experience in the guaranteed American cultural story. And so because of that, I think you've watched the older half of Gen Z kind of struggle to find their footing in what it means to be an adult, what it means to take responsibility for our lives, and who we're going to be in finding our identity. But again, I see so much hope in finding that answer in Christ. And I think that's where, out of necessity, because we don't find meaning in our jobs, in our school experiences, in what we're seeing on social media, in entertainment, or any of the above, we're only finding meaning through God. Young people are really righting the ship right now culturally out of necessity. I wish we didn't have to do that out of a necessity from a mental health crisis, but God has a tendency to take broken things and turn them into beautiful things throughout all of history.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. It is. And it's out of that brokenness, I think, that his hand and the way that he works to redeem, to transform and to make things new, it becomes unmistakable, right? And so I think sometimes the most desperate situations can show the most miraculous workings of God. Not that we dive into those, like, let's make this situation in America so desperate that the salvation of God is so unmistakably clear. But I think that's where we're headed.
Yeah.
I think that's where we're headed. I am very hopeful. What I love about you is that you're a happy warrior. There's a lot of joy right here. Not so much elsewhere, that we see, but there's a lot of things to be hopeful about. And so if everything that you said in this interview is true, and I know that it is, we have a lot of reasons to be hopeful for our future, especially for this Gen Z generation.
We sure do. And that's not to say everything is always going to go our way, or we'll always win every election, or everything will work out in the immediate sense culturally in our country. I've actually had a lot of peace over the last few years thinking strategically about this and reflecting on this in prayer, that probably it won't, actually. More likely than not, our culture is probably only going to get crazier. And a lot of this evil is only going to continue to get louder. But in my opinion, that is a clear-cut sign that Satan feels like he's losing. And we're watching this spiritual battle play out in a very visible way for the first time in modern history. We often think this happens behind the shadows, but people are literally coming forward to say they want to castrate your children, and they want mass genocide of preborn children, and they want all of these crazy policies that never would have been publicly advocated for even 10 years ago. But evil gets loud when it is threatened by good. And I think what we're seeing now is a contagiousness of courage when a few people are willing to stand up and tell the truth to a world that's rejecting it. And truth has a name, right? The truth is God himself. Then all of a sudden other people feel the courage to do the exact same thing. And I find no coincidence that in the midst of this culture war we talk a lot about, that I've been working in for the last few years, God has become the forefront of the conversation. Donald Trump opened his latest rally with the Our Father prayer in Georgia this week to thousands of attendees. And to see the audience bow their heads in unison in prayer together, I think is really creating an opportunity to contrast that dichotomy between good and evil and keep fighting it in every way we can. Even if it feels like a setback, or we've lost a particular battle, or something comes to fruition that's very difficult for us to wrap our heads around, we can always have faith in knowing in the end, God's already won.
Amen. He has already won. Jesus Christ has overcome the world. And Romans 8, we are more than conquerors, right? Through Christ Jesus. And so I do believe, I agree with you. It's going to get worse before it gets better. But man, these are incredible times we're living in. Thank you so much, Isabel Brown, for joining us. Appreciate your book, The End of the Alphabet, How Gen Z Can Save America. Also, your show, The Isabel Brown Show. Encourage folks to check it out. God bless you.
God bless you as well. Thanks for having me.
Hey, did you find this helpful? I hope you did. Please like and subscribe, share with a friend, and also go to standingforfreedom.com, where you can find more content, articles, podcasts, and our Theology of Politics series, all at standingforfreedom.com.